What if a single night on the front lines could shake the world's security and economy? On April 1st, 2024, that what if became a chilling reality. As most of the world slept, the Ukraine conflict erupted into its most intense escalation in months, a night unlike any other, with consequences rippling far beyond the battlefield. It started long before dawn. Russia unleashed a massive, coordinated assault across Ukraine, launching hundreds, possibly thousands, of drones and missiles. According to Ukrainian defense officials, the attack involved over 3,000 unmanned aerial vehicles, swarming in relentless waves. For hours, Ukrainian air defense fought desperately to intercept them. But many broke through, heading further west than ever before. The first waves hit strategic points in Kherson and Kryvyi Rih, igniting fierce air battles overhead. But this was just the beginning. As the sun rose, new drone swarms pressed deeper into Ukrainian territory. For the first time, entire regions in the country's west, Lutsk, Ternopil, even Ivano-Frankivsk, saw skies thick with buzzing drones. Critical logistics centers burned, major power stations were struck, leaving tens of thousands without electricity. The attacks were calculated, exploiting gaps exposed by earlier waves. Ukrainian sources stopped publishing tracking maps altogether, a rare move hinting at the scale and unpredictability of the assault. But the shockwaves didn't stop at Ukraine's borders. Simultaneously, the Middle East was heating up, with mounting tensions and fresh security incidents. Suddenly, the world wasn't just watching a war in Eastern Europe. It was bracing for a much broader crisis. This one night's escalation exposed cracks in global security systems, rattled diplomatic alliances, and sent tremors through international energy markets. Financial analysts and governments scrambled to assess the risk. Could a single day's fighting upend the global order? April 1st made that threat uncomfortably real. Here's the hard truth. If you only look at the headlines about missiles and drones, you'll miss the full picture. What happened that night is already changing how nations talk to each other, how energy flows across borders, and how markets respond to risk. Miss it, and you could be blindsided, whether you're an investor, a business owner, or just someone who cares about global stability. So what exactly unfolded on that pivotal day? And why do the aftershocks matter to you, no matter where you live? Let's break down what happened on April 1st, and why it matters far beyond Ukraine. How massive was Russia's latest attack on Ukraine, and what set it apart from the relentless barrages we've seen before? On the night of April 1st, 2024, the world witnessed an escalation that shocked even seasoned military analysts. This wasn't just another round of airstrikes. It was the largest coordinated drone and missile assault Russia has launched in months, and it carried a chilling new strategy. Picture this. Over 3,000 drones, unleashed in carefully timed waves, swept across the Ukrainian skies. The first wave wasn't actually meant to destroy anything. It was designed to saturate and exhaust Ukraine's air defense systems. As Ukrainian defenders scrambled to intercept and shoot down the first swarm, the second wave moved in, targeting crucial logistics hubs, power plants, and critical infrastructure. It was a tactical move straight from a high-stakes chess game, meant to break Ukraine's ability to protect itself, piece by piece. But the scope didn't stop at the front lines or obvious military targets. This attack stretched from the southern city of Kherson all the way west to Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, places that, until recently, had been relatively insulated from the worst of the violence. The Russian assault zeroed in on large-scale logistics centers and civilian infrastructure. The biggest blow came to Ukraine's power grid. Energy facilities went dark, and up to 11,000 households found themselves suddenly without electricity. In the dead of night, entire communities flickered off the map. Ukrainian air defenses fought back as best they could, but the sheer volume and timing of the attack made it nearly impossible to intercept everything. The country's military command stopped publishing operational maps for security reasons, a rare move that underlined the seriousness of the assault. Even seasoned observers struggled to piece together an accurate picture of what was happening in real time. But why should the world care about the technical details of this one night's assault? Because this wasn't just about missiles and drones. It was a calculated attempt to systematically degrade Ukraine's defenses. If successful, it would leave not only Ukraine, but the entire region, and even NATO itself, more vulnerable to further escalation. Air defense, after all, is the shield that stands between a country and chaos. If that shield begins to crack, the risks spill over borders and into our collective security. And there's even more at stake here. When energy infrastructure goes down, it doesn't just mean cold homes. It shakes energy markets already on edge, drives up prices, and throws supply chains into turmoil. As these attacks become more sophisticated, financial markets react, sometimes with panic, rippling out in ways that can ultimately impact your wallet wherever you live. Now, while the air assault dominated the headlines, what happened in the skies was only one piece of the puzzle. On the ground, as dawn broke, the conflict in Ukraine took a dramatic new turn. Let's shift our focus to the front lines themselves, where the night's chaos set off a chain reaction few were prepared for. The ground war is changing, and with it, the fate of entire regions. On April 1st, as the world's attention flickered between news alerts, Russian forces launched a night of relentless drone and missile strikes that didn't just hit military supply lines, they hammered deep into city centers, leaving devastation in places like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. But what unfolded on the front lines was even more consequential. Across a broad sweep from Sumy in the north, through Kharkiv and Donetsk, down to Zaporizhzhia in the south, the Russian military made coordinated advances unlike anything seen in recent months. In the forests of Sumy, Russian troops carved out new positions, pushing deeper than before. Reports confirmed they seized control of Mala Korchakovka, a small settlement, but one with outsized strategic significance for the region. Further east, intense fighting erupted around Kupiansk, where Russian units mounted pressure on key crossing points, threatening to choke off Ukrainian logistics. The pace and scale of these shifts were staggering. Analysts noted a record number of frontline changes in a single day, eclipsing even the most dynamic periods of the conflict last year. In Luhansk, Russian sources declared once again that their forces had secured full control over the territory, including areas that had switched hands during Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive. While such claims have come before, this time, the evidence on the ground, flag raisings, newly fortified positions, intercepted communications, suggests a renewed Russian grip on the region. Ukrainian forces, far from passive, responded with fierce counterattacks. In areas like Minkivka, they managed to claw back some positions, but the cost was steep. The fog of war offered brief cover for an armored thrust near Pokrovsk, but Russian artillery and drones intercepted the advance, resulting in severe losses. Reports speak of at least 16 armored vehicles, including a coveted Western-supplied Leopard tank, destroyed in a single engagement. Videos from the Zaporizhzhia front show Russian troops raising their flag in central Baikove, after pushing back Ukrainian counterstrikes and consolidating gains. The toll is mounting, not just in machines, but in men. And here, signs of strain inside Ukraine are becoming impossible to ignore. As the fighting intensifies, the country's mobilization system is buckling. Public criticism has erupted over conscription practices, with mounting allegations of violence against draftees, even those on leave or not yet in uniform. One prominent Ukrainian officer, known for his candor, openly condemned what he called a lack of functioning law enforcement and accused draft officials of using force against both civilians and soldiers alike. These aren't just isolated incidents. They point to a wider crisis of confidence and morale on the home front. Complicating everything, Ukraine's reserves are thinning. Ammunition and equipment are running low. The pipeline of Western aid, once seen as a given, is now at risk, held up by political wrangling abroad and growing donor fatigue. Russian officials, sensing weakness, have issued new ultimatums: withdraw from Donbass within 2 months, or face even harsher terms. Ukrainian President Zelensky, in turn, has proposed a temporary holiday ceasefire, but Moscow refused. Meanwhile, intelligence suggests that Russia is preparing to mobilize even more troops. potentially enough to not only break the deadlock in Ukraine, but to threaten the wider region, including the Baltics. What's at stake is no longer just a patch of territory. It's the stability of Ukraine itself and the credibility of its backers. If Ukrainian positions continue to crumble, and if Western support falters, the risk of a dramatic collapse or a dangerous escalation has never been higher. But the story doesn't end at the trenches. As the military crisis deepens, a new set of battles is erupting on the diplomatic and financial front lines, redrawing the contours of global security and economic stability. What happens when war pushes diplomacy and finance to the breaking point? On April 1st, that question stopped being hypothetical. Within hours of Russia's massive assault, Moscow delivered a chilling ultimatum to Kyiv: withdraw Ukrainian forces from the entire Donbas region within 2 months, or prepare to face even harsher terms of surrender. But here's the catch. That 2-month window doesn't start sometime in the future. According to the Kremlin, the clock is already ticking, and every day of delay leaves Ukraine with less and less time to respond. President Zelensky tried to counter with a proposal for an Orthodox Easter ceasefire on April 12th. Russia flatly rejected it. Now, with the possibility of diplomacy slipping away, Ukraine is warning of an even darker prospect: a new Russian mobilization that could tip the scales, not just in Ukraine, but potentially threaten neighboring Baltic states as well. Moscow is keeping quiet about these warnings, but the message is clear: military pressure is mounting. But the cracks aren't just appearing between armies, they're splitting Ukraine from within. For the first time, a prominent Ukrainian commander, known by the call sign Kivlyanin, publicly criticized the government's handling of mobilization. He condemned forced conscription tactics, even alleging violence against civilians and soldiers alike. This kind of open dissent from an active duty officer is almost unheard of in wartime, and it points to a deepening crisis in Ukraine's ability to staff and sustain its defense. Meanwhile, as Kyiv faces ultimatums on the battlefield, financial lifelines are fraying fast. The European Union, once a steadfast backer, now admits it can't guarantee the 90 billion euros in aid Ukraine was counting on. 20 rounds of sanctions against Russia have hit political walls. Hungary is digging in its heels, blocking fresh measures. With the cost of war mounting and aid uncertain, analysts warn that Ukraine could run out of funds to sustain its military as early as June. Combine that with relentless attacks on Ukraine's energy grid, growing risk of blackouts, and shrinking state capacity, and you get a picture of a country being squeezed on every front. This is what a perfect storm looks like: diplomatic ultimatums, financial shortfalls, and internal dissent, all colliding at a moment when Ukraine is under its greatest military pressure in months. If these crises aren't resolved, the stakes are existential, not just for Ukraine, but for the wider region. State collapse, a spiraling humanitarian disaster, or even a broader war across Eastern Europe could be on the horizon. But here's the thing: Ukraine is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The shockwaves from this escalation are already rattling the Middle East and sending tremors through global markets. Let's take a closer look at how these events are feeding into a wider crisis, far beyond the front lines. When wars overlap, no one's energy or economy is safe. Let's zoom out from the battlefield in Ukraine for a moment and trace the shockwaves rippling outward, right into the world's energy arteries, digital backbone, and halls of global power. Because what happened on April 1st wasn't just another missile strike. It was a warning shot to every nation and every household that global stability can be upended overnight. Take what unfolded in the Middle East just hours after Russia's assault on Ukraine. Iran attacked a Kuwaiti oil tanker in the waters near the UAE, instantly exposing just how vulnerable regional infrastructure really is. It was a reminder that the world's oil doesn't flow from some distant pipeline. It travels through choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, where a single act of aggression can throttle supply and send prices spiraling. And Iran wasn't just flexing its muscles at sea. Tehran published a list of 18 companies with U.S. ties. Names like Microsoft, Apple, and Google were front and center, warning that every strike on Iranian citizens could trigger retaliatory cyber attacks against critical tech and information infrastructure. In other words, the Middle East's conflicts could now jump the firewall, hitting not just oil routes, but the digital veins that keep the global economy running. On the ground, the U.S. was anything but idle. Reports confirmed a massive surge of American military might into the region. 3 aircraft carrier groups, along with elite units like the 82nd Airborne Division, have arrived or are en route. Thousands of Marines and support personnel have been quietly deployed. The official line? To build up overwhelming air and sea dominance, strong enough to deter any regional adversary. But behind closed doors, even the White House is sending mixed signals. Some insiders say President Trump is wary of getting dragged into a conflict that could drag on for months. Rumors are swirling about a possible U.S. pullback, if the situation in the Strait of Hormuz can be managed without full-blown intervention. The message to allies: if you rely on Middle Eastern oil, maybe it's time to secure it yourselves. And for those who can't, Washington's hinting, perhaps not so subtly, that American oil could be your next best option. To stabilize the seesawing oil market, the U.S. has even eased sanctions for Central Asian states, allowing Russian oil to flow unimpeded through their territories. This move, along with financial maneuvering, briefly sent the WTI oil price down by about 5%, but analysts aren't convinced the calm will last. Markets remain jittery, trading rapidly on every scrap of news, because as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains a question mark, the world's energy supply and prices are anyone's guess. Meanwhile, Israel has doubled down in Lebanon, aiming to establish a buffer zone along the Litani River. Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear these operations are non-negotiable, ratcheting up tension on another volatile front. And as these crises overlap, the tempo of drone and missile warfare is draining both Western and Russian arsenals at an alarming rate. Requests for U.S. missile defense batteries have already hit a brick wall, with Washington saying it can't spare any more for foreign allies. Its own stockpiles are stretched thin. This exposes a core vulnerability. Even the world's most powerful militaries have supply chains that can't keep pace with modern wars fought at this intensity. All of these crises are interconnected. Oil prices, tech systems, and global supply chains can be disrupted in a matter of hours, reverberating from a drone strike in Ukraine, to a cyber attack on Silicon Valley, to a tanker halted in the Persian Gulf. And when these systems are shaken, it's not just diplomats and generals who feel it. It's ordinary people, families facing higher fuel costs, businesses scrambling to manage supply delays, investors spooked by wild market swings. The stakes couldn't be clearer. In today's world, distant wars can hit home faster and harder than ever before. So, what does all this mean for you, and for the world's future direction? This crisis won't wait for headlines. It affects you already. We've just watched how one night's military escalation in Ukraine didn't just redraw battle lines, but sent shockwaves through the entire fabric of global security, energy, and finance. When Russian missiles and drones hammered Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, it wasn't just a local tragedy. Immediately, energy markets shuddered. Oil prices plummeted by nearly 5%, but every analyst warns it's a temporary swing, not a stable trend. Why? Because until the world knows whether U.S. statements reflect real policy or just tactical bluffs, every move is a gamble. The fate of the Armenian Strait, still under tight Iranian control, remains a choke point, with every tanker's passage scrutinized and sanctioned. Meanwhile, Gulf countries like the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia issue bold statements, but lack the ability to truly shift the balance on their own. Israel presses forward in Lebanon, determined to create its buffer zones, and the U.S. scrambles to reinforce air defenses in the region, even as its own arsenal stretches thin from intercepting the relentless barrages of Iranian missiles and drones. All of this is happening at a time when the world's supply of expensive interceptor missiles is being depleted at an alarming rate. Replenishing those stocks isn't quick or easy. And let's not forget Ukraine's powerful response. Major drone and missile strikes deep inside Russian territory, setting oil refineries ablaze, forcing mass evacuations and even targeting the port at Ust-Luga, damaging critical infrastructure and civilian areas. Russia's air defenses managed to shoot down dozens of Ukrainian drones, but the sheer intensity of the attacks makes it clear: no system is impenetrable, and every escalation risks tipping the conflict into new, unpredictable territory. Here's what's truly at stake for all of us. These events aren't isolated. They're interconnected threads in a global tapestry where military actions thousands of miles away can rattle your investments, spike your energy bills, threaten your job, or drag your country into decisions with massive consequences. The volatility in energy prices, uncertainty over supply lines, and the potential for retaliatory strikes add up to a world that is increasingly unstable, and that instability can hit home fast. If we ignore how fast-moving crises like this one can spiral, we leave ourselves, and our societies, vulnerable to shocks we never saw coming. So, if you're waiting for a single headline to tell you it's time to pay attention, you're already behind. This is a moment when being informed isn't just smart, it's necessary. Because the tremors from April 1st are still being felt, and the aftershocks could shape everything from global alliances to your personal security. As the situation evolves hour by hour, in war rooms, on trading floors, and in the corridors of power, the world order itself is up for grabs. Stay alert, stay informed, and don't underestimate how quickly the front lines can move to your doorstep.